I think from what we've been saying, the very simple distinction is that analytical nonfiction, or even descriptive nonfiction, journalistic nonfiction, begins with an idea in mind. And I guess this is especially true for academic prose. And it says, I'm going to prove this thing. This is the argument I'm making, and I'm going to prove it. And I'm going to prove it by making these affirmative arguments, and I'm going to prove it by considering possible objections to my argument and telling you why those are moot. And creative nonfiction really, for the most part, doesn't worry about that kind of argumentation at all. It begins by telling a story or creating a character in the way that fiction would, only the character that gets created is a real person with whatever real issues that character may have. It dwells on images. It begins with perhaps a large idea. And this is one of the funny things that when students get to college, we say, oh, stop beginning those essays with those large ideas, because that funnel method, it doesn't really work. It never gets you as focused as you want to be. Creative nonfiction, I think, is a place where you can begin with that big idea and spend a certain amount of time just meandering and mulling within an essay the implications of that idea in a way that you're not allowed to in a more analytical piece, which has a much clearer target. One thing that's important here, and I think this is important for both analytical and creative nonfiction, is the revision process. It's one thing to meander around in a big idea for however many pages in a first draft. It's another thing altogether to be doing the same thing in draft number 20. Even if in a creative piece, if you're doing that in draft number 20, even though it's a creative piece, you probably need to figure out a clearer focus for what you're after. But the way you arrive at that focus, for the analytical essay, that focus is always there, sort of at the starting line, and the finish is having proved it, demonstrated it fully. For the creative essay, the idea is something out there kind of on the horizon, and you feel yourself heading toward it. And maybe you get there, often you get there, but sometimes you don't. Sometimes creative nonfiction is content to ask questions and to meditate on questions, even if an answer isn't altogether possible. And analytical fiction is a lot less comfortable doing that. Analytical fiction begins with the notion that there's an answer here. There may be more than one answer, but there's an answer. I'm going to give you this answer, and I'm going to tell you why this answer is the right one. So that would be, but there's a place I think where they meet. And that's why things like cultural critique can be either analytical or creative nonfiction. And at some level, autobiography can be as well. Creative nonfiction or a little bit more analytical. And you think about all of these books out there by captains of industry whose basic purpose and the reason people buy them is, well, I want to know how to make money too. It's not the sort of memoir impulse, the internal life of the character that people are worried about. So there's very strong analytical impulse in that kind of biography and autobiography as well. So, these things are meeting up somewhere, and that's why they belong in the same field. That's why we think about them that way. But the fact of the matter is, I think, for lack of a better word, that creative nonfiction starts in a more miasmic place. You're kind of floating around, coming up with the idea as you craft. And that I don't mean that you can't begin with a very tight beginning. Creative nonfiction often does. But the tightness is in the image, the tightness is in the narrative, the tightness is in the character, not necessarily in the idea that evolves out of those. And in analytical nonfiction, you begin with that tight idea, and then maybe tell stories or create characters or mull other ideas as a means of proving that idea. So, two sides of the same coin, maybe.